insurrection and someone had killed them.
Thank you very much indeed.
Mr. Potter, I think we can agree probably on the first matter I'm going to put to you. The Woodvilles set about a preemptive strike for power. Those, I think, are your words. That resulted in Richard being summoned by Hastings from the north.
Yes.
Result of that, Rivers and Grey, two of the leaders of the Woodville faction, with the Prince at Stony Stratford, arrested. Subsequently to be executed, almost certainly without trial.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that, actually. There is a
I
reference...
use my words carefully, almost certainly without trial.
Quite possibly with a trial, but under the... presided over by the Earl of Northumberland, as stated in one of the chronicles.
But very much a barrack room trial over a very short space of time, if it took place at all. Yes. And
Killing without trial was not an unusual event in these days, I gather.
No, it became commoner when the Tudors were on the throne.
Well...
That's a good tu quoque, if I may say so.
It was also against the desire of the Council, the Royal Council, wasn't it, who had specifically refused to ratify their execution.
Well, what happened was...
Well, that's right, isn't it? Firstly...
yes. May I state the grounds on
No,
this?
Mr. Potter, first of all, please, just answer the question. That is correct, isn't
Initially, yes.
Oh, yes, initially. Thereafter, Richard ordered their execution without further reference to the Council.
Did he?
I'm suggesting to you that's what happened.
No, I'm suggesting that is quite wrong. I'm suggesting that the Council, the later Council, did authorise their execution. There's no reason to suppose that Richard ordered it
Is there
himself.
any evidence of that?
There's no evidence that he acted individually.
Is there any evidence that the Council authorised it?
There is no evidence that they didn't.
Is there any evidence that they did?
No.
Thank you.
That there wouldn't be.
The result was that the result that followed from that was that Richard clearly then set about the crown.
I don't think those two facts are connected, no.
Richard set about for the crown at some stage, did he not?
Yes.
And do you accept, which is again is suggested directly by the chroniclers, that Hastings, having had his views on that, asked for by Buckingham, made it absolutely clear that he would have no truck with that suggestion?
I would suggest that Richard aimed for the crown as a result of Hastings' conspiracy to kill him.
Now, why should Hastings possibly wish to conspire to kill Richard when Hastings was accepting and summoning Richard to protect Richard's protectorship?
Because Buckingham, as you've just mentioned, I think, and is mentioned in the chronicles, sounded Hastings out as to whether he would accept Richard as king.
Precisely. And Hastings said no.
Yes.
And the result of that was that Hastings was dealt with by way of trick, arrest, and immediate execution.
Hastings was plotting against Richard's life.
There is no evidence of any sort to support that proposition, is there?
Can I mention three pieces of evidence?
Yes, please.
The first of all, the letter that Richard wrote to York, that there was a plot against his life. Secondly...
By the Woodvilles?
Secondly...
By the Woodvilles?
Hastings had allied himself to the Woodvilles.
Hastings was totally anti-Woodville, Mr. Potter.
I'm sorry.
Well, do you disagree with the evidence of Mr. Richards about that?
No, I don't. The whole point was that Hastings swung back to the Woodvilles because his nose had been put out of joint by Buckingham.
Where's the evidence of that?
Hastings, that is in the situation.
In the what?
In the situation.
No, where is the evidence that Hastings swung back to Woodville?
We are both speculating, are we not?
Well, I'm not speculating because I at least have the backing of Mancini.
Yeah.
Mancini...
Can I say something about Mancini?
Well, in a minute, Mr. Potter, but perhaps we ought to move on a little. The fact of the matter is that Hastings was dealt with in a way which shocked, horrified, and appalled still does.
As a result of a plot. And that College of Arms document clearly states that there was a Hastings plot, and that dates from the 1480s. It's much earlier.
Prince Richard was got out of sanctuary by a trick and lies, correct?
No, I wouldn't say that at all.
Prince Richard was got out of sanctuary on the pretext that he was required for his brother's coronation.
According to whom?
According to Mancini.
Yes. Well, I wouldn't trust Mancini on that point.
Why not?
I mean, Mancini's source was Edwardian loyalists. Mancini did not speak English in the view of his editor. He had a very limited view. He was an honest reporter, as I have said.
Yes.
But he had a very limited view. He never got involved on Richard's side. He doesn't seem to have spoken to anyone putting that point of view. He was against Richard. He was against the Woodvilles.
Well,
his information came from people who thought the same way as Hastings. So he would naturally say that Hastings' plot was an invention of Richard's. That would be quite natural for him to say. But we don't have to believe him.
No, but the trouble is, Mr. Potter, that wherever the chroniclers, such as Mancini and Croyland, say something detrimental to Richard, then the pro-Ricardians then say unreliable, don't
Well,
they?
that's a statement with which I don't agree, and it is played, if it is played, it is played the other way just as much.
How do you think the prince's mother was persuaded to allow the prince to be taken out of the safe sanctuary of the abbey?
Because she trusted Richard, I would say. You see, that the tower was the right place for the boy to be. It was a royal palace. His brother presumably wanted company, and that was the right place for him to be.
It was the wrong place for him to be, because he didn't stay there for very long, did he? He ended up under the staircase, Mr. Potter.
Well, according to you, I'm doubtful about those bones, I'm sorry to have to say. I mean, the sex, the century is not known.
Mr. Potter, again, this is the trouble. The Ricardians had a good run until the early 1930s, and then Mancini was discovered in the library at Lille, his record, and then the bones were discovered the following year. And both of them were a bitter blow to those who had been supporting Richard, weren't they?
No, the bones don't prove, even if the bones are genuine, they don't prove that Richard killed the boys.
No, but they prove that they were killed in the tower.
If they are true, they do. It is likely that they were killed in the tower, but it is not certain.
And there is no way, is there, Mr. Potter, that they could have been killed in the tower by anyone without Richard at least knowing about it.
He would have known about it afterwards, but not necessarily at the time. And can I point out that if you are going to kill people in the tower and get rid of their bodies, you do not bury them very deeply in the ground. There is a very easily available exit, which is the Watergate.
They weren't discovered for 200 years, and then only by mistake.
Other bodies were discovered and decided that they were the princes. There were bodies discovered in 1647 as well as 1674.
If you accept, Mr. Potter, if you accept, as I think you did a moment or two ago, that if someone had killed the princes in the tower, then Richard must have known, well, then he remained silent, did he not?
That is true.
For the whole of the rest of his life, not for very long, for 2 years or so.
That is true.
He never sought to find out who had killed them and accused that person?
If it was Buckingham...
No, don't just worry about Buckingham at the moment. Anybody, whoever had killed those princes, and I suggest no one could possibly have got into the tower with Brackenbury the keeper holding the keys and killed those princes without Richard knowing within the time it took a horse rider to get from London to wherever Richard was.
Constable of England could certainly have got in the King's absence.
Not without Brackenbury the keeper knowing.
No, quite
Right.
But that does not mean that Richard knew at the time.
No,
it means that he would have known afterwards.
Within a few days?
Yes,
of course, yes, I accept that.
And Brackenbury was an ally and friend of the king, was he not?
Exactly. He would have told the king instantly.
There could be no possible reason for Richard, with the rumours that were flying around and his insecure position on the throne, there was no possible reason for him to remain silent or not inquired from Brackenbury as to who had done this dreadful deed and accused